The Mimic has been such a huge topic in the FNaF theorist community, but it's one that is essentially split in half. There's the side of the bigger YouTubers like FNaF and MatPat who are convinced that it's all just an elaborate parallel, and most of their fans believe them despite only really using their interpretations as sources without reading the books themselves. And on the other side, we have the larger FNaF community, mostly on Discord and Reddit and stuff, who mostly agree that Tales from the Pizzaplex is in the game's timeline, and that the Mimic is all directly within the games and not a parallel. Now, this is not a hate video on MatPat or FNaF. In fact, I'm actually pretty big fans of both of them, as I've made clear on many occasions. But no matter how popular they are or how long they've been theorists, it doesn't really change the fact that their theories on the Mimic don't really add up for one simple reason. Tales from the Pizzaplex does 100% take place within the game's timeline, and in this video I'm going to once again prove it to you all. However, just because I don't agree with their theories doesn't mean that their videos aren't good, because they did actually push me to think a bit more about the Mimic and change a couple of my opinions, albeit not to match theirs, but my opinions just changed in general. It is a bit unfortunate because my timeline videos are done now, and this theory will alter the timeline a little bit, but not massively, so it's not a huge deal. So by the end of this video, you should be convinced that Tales is in the games, and you will have all the evidence needed to know the truth about whether or not Gregory is a robot, how his story worked in tandem with the Mimic and the Storyteller, and you will know that Edwin is his own character who does not parallel Henry, and you'll know how Edwin created the Mimic, who is absolutely glitch trap. So with all that out of the way, let's finally get started. Because I've talked about a lot of this stuff in past videos, I'm going to be playing the clip of me explaining all this from my other Mimic video, just so that you don't really have to re-watch my other videos on the topic, but you might want to anyway. It's going to be a little while, so strap in. The Mimic made its first appearance as a burned and damaged endoskeleton in the Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues, with a replaced head delivered to the under-construction Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex, which ended up going rogue and murdering a bunch of members of the construction and renovation crews. It ends up being locked in the burned-down Freddy Fazbear's Pizzaplex that the Pizzaplex was being built over, only for a group of teenagers to sneak in and find themselves trapped with the endoskeleton in the building, which began killing them one by one. It wasn't until Epilogue 4 that we actually learned that this endoskeleton was either a Mimic Model 1 or 2 and could expand and contract to fit in any costume. That was the extent of the information that we had about this thing at the time, besides the fact that it is clearly the endoskeleton that would later be used for Burn Trap. Fast forward to the Storyteller, the second story in Tales Book 5, the Barbados Conclusion. The Storyteller's main character was Edwin, whose company had failed and been bought out by Fazbear Entertainment decades ago. Fazbear decides to install the Storyteller, an animatronic that would sit in a baobab tree at the center of the Pizzaplex and would auto-generate stories. Edwin was suspicious of the project, so he investigated and found that the animatronic's behavior was being altered by the Storyteller, which was running a program called Mimic 1. Edwin was greatly afraid of the program, leading many to believe that Edwin was the one who created the Mimic. But now, with the release of the story in Nexi called The Mimic, we now know exactly what the Mimic is. Edwin had built the Mimic 40 years prior to the Storyteller to entertain his son David while he worked on animatronics for Fazbear Entertainment. The Mimic would essentially copy everything it observed. However, Edwin's son died, but the Mimic still imitated what he did. So in a fit of rage, Edwin destroyed the Mimic with a metal pipe. Months later, Edwin had abandoned the factory he lived with David in, and Fazbear employees were sent to clean up the mess he left behind. However, the door shut and locked them inside with the Mimic, who killed them all. The Mimic killed them basically using all the things that it had learned from David, only he did all these things aggressively due to witnessing the beating Edwin gave it itself. Since it imitated what it saw, it imitated Edwin's aggressiveness. However, the Mimic 1 program had appeared in the Storyteller as the program that caused the animatronics to act strangely, something we know in the games to have been caused by the Glitch Trap virus. The Mimic 1 program is the Glitch Trap virus. Given Glitch Trap and Help Wanted recreated William Afton luring the children to the safe room, it is safe to conclude that the Mimic, and in turn Glitch Trap, is not William Afton, just a program mimicking him, likely due to him witnessing William lure the children during the missing children incident, mimicking what it saw. But how much of this is actually accurate to the games? Well, all of it, because the stories and Tales from the Pizzaplex take place within the game's timeline. I've made 2 different YouTube shorts on this topic before, so it's pretty easy to explain all the evidence. When Tales from the Pizzaplex was first announced, they were said to be in the world of the newest games, meaning that they'd take place in the game's continuity. However, this description was changed, so how can we trust this? The answer to that question has been answered by both the contents of the stories and Scholastic themselves. The story Help Wanted tells the story of something we know from FNaF VR, where there's an indie game developer who made games making fun of the old Freddy's murders. Within Help Wanted, there are game modes for the first 3 FNaF games, but nothing further. There's some games that are similar to some from FNaF 4 and Sister Location, but there's no game mode for those games themselves. In Help Wanted the story, we have an indie game developer hired by Fazbear Entertainment to make games to make fun of the old Freddy's murders, just like is talked about in FNaF VR. However, Steve was hired to make 4 games, but on the night that he finished the 3rd game, he dies, meaning the 4th game was never created, explaining why there's only FNaFs 1 to 3 in FNaF VR. Some other stories like Somnophobia and Bobby Dots describe exactly what we see the Pizzaplex like in the games, and the epilogues perfectly match what we see in Security Breach with the pizza place under the Pizzaplex. A bottle of water is also mentioned in the first epilogue, which we see a lot of in the pizza place in Security Breach. There's also the GGY story, which has both the GGY name on all the arcades as well as a guy named Axel whose initials are ABC and is pretty high up on the scoreboard. And in Security Breach we can find arcades with GGY as the top scorer, and we can even find ABC. However, what about Scholastic? Well, recently NTOM actually emailed them asking about the change in description, to which they responded saying that the description was not changed because of it being inaccurate, but simply because of the marketing. They've said in the past that the descriptions and marketing stuff like this was provided by Scott, meaning he was the one that claimed Tales was in the games, and Scholastic were the ones who changed it. Tales being claimed to be in the games still applies to the series. And finally, there's the Storyteller's Tree. Many people ask, well, if Tales is in the games, then where's the Storyteller's Tree in Security Breach? But the issue with this argument is that the Storyteller takes place in the early years of the 5 years the Plex is open, meaning that there's plenty of time for it to be removed. Just because it isn't there doesn't mean it never was, and there actually is definitive proof that it was, something that everyone overlooked until very recently. In Princess Quest, right at the end, we unlock a door that leads to Glitch Trap. However, this door has an interesting pattern on it. It almost looks like... Wait, that is a baobab tree. The Mimic virus, aka the Glitch Trap virus, is spread through the Pizzaplex using a baobab tree in the Storyteller, and there's a baobab tree on the door leading to Glitch Trap. That settles it. Tales from the Pizzaplex is in the game's timeline. Everything I just said comes from my first video on the Mimic, and the reason I'm repeating all of it is because all that stuff remains the same for this theory video. But there's also stuff that differs from that video, so if you had to go watch that video to understand, you may get the wrong idea about the theories mentioned there, especially since my opinions have changed a bit. Some of my opinions I stand by, like my conclusion on the sticky note room, so if you want, you should still go watch that video, but this one has a bit more I agree with, and I also made a follow-up to that video discussing Stitchline games and Splitline games, so check that out if you haven't as well. But everything that I just talked about shows that the Mimic program and the Glitch Trap virus are one and the same, created by Edwin. MatPat suggested that Edwin is a parallel to Henry due to the fact that both are single fathers of very young children, both build animatronics that act like their children for their children, both of their children die because they were accidentally left outside, and what's left behind is the animatronic they built for their child continuing to act like the dead child. However, if you really think about it, most of that isn't really true. In the novel trilogy, Henry is not a single father of one young child. He has 2 children, Charlotte and Sammy, and his wife is still around. When Charlotte dies, Henry is caught up in his grief and finds that his wife and Sammy both leave him. Henry isn't a single father at all because his wife is still around up until after Charlotte dies. Ella also was never supposed to act like Charlotte. The only reason that she did was again because Charlotte died and Henry's anguish infected her. The Mimic likely isn't even powered by agony, as it's mostly just replicating the behaviors of David and Edwin and later Afton. Charlotte did die outside, but that was not an accident. She was forced outside by older kids and was then intentionally murdered by Afton, while David intentionally ran outside and was accidentally hit by a car. Henry also cherishes Ella because she acts like Charlotte, while Edwin hates that the Mimic is acting like David and literally beats the hell out of it. While there's some minor similarities between them, Henry and Edwin are individual characters, and that's also because Tales is in the games, and while yes, parallels can coexist within the same universe, the evidence for Edwin and Henry being parallels just doesn't really hold up. The Mimic was made by Edwin, not Henry, and the Mimic later becomes Glitchtrap and also Burntrap. Something I also noticed when I was reading the storyteller is that Mr. Burrows just makes no sense. Around midway through the story, Edwin informs Mr. Burrows that the animatronics are acting differently, but he doesn't care. Then later he notices that the animatronics are acting differently and blames Edwin for it, which makes no sense. Later on, he literally traps Edwin in the storyteller's tree, knowing full well that there's no ventilation, acknowledges that this will kill him, but then later questions why he isn't trying to escape, and then also thinks that Edwin just can't die properly. Mr. Burrows is just really inconsistent, blaming Edwin for something Edwin complained about after ignoring him about it, and simultaneously knowing that Edwin will die, but also not knowing he will die. It's almost as if Mr. Burrows got infected with the Mimic, sort of like Vanessa, where he has a sort of split personality. It would explain why he's so stupid, and it would explain the sort of meta hint at rabbits, considering his name is Mr. Burrows. But when Mr. Burrows eventually finds Edwin, he's written a suspicious code, essentially triangles within triangles. It's the same type of code as the one in Michael's room from Sister Location that we can find in Security Breach. However, up until I watched MatPat's video, I strongly doubted that the code was the same. I knew that it was the same type of code, but I doubted that the one that Edwin wrote was the same one on the wall. The reason for this is because the code absolutely talks about Gregory. It lists all the things that Gregory can do in Security Breach, all the movements he can do, and also crushing the Vile Band, which matches how we see Gregory destroying the Glamrock animatronics. However, what I didn't really consider is that the code was actually Edwin talking about the Mimic, and then trying to reach out to get someone or something to stop the Mimic. Breaking and mending makes sense because Edwin broke the Mimic, and then the Fazbear team that went to the factory fixed him up, mended him. Edwin built the breath, he built the Mimic. They Hunt Now, Drawn to Life, is saying that the Glamrock animatronics have been infected by the Mimic and are now drawn to people. Not Real Still Keen is referring to the Mimic not being a real person, but still being intent on doing what it was programmed to do. The wall code really is about the Mimic, but the one problem I found with this was that it's in Michael Afton's room. But why would it be in there if it had nothing to do with him? It wouldn't make sense. But if you really think about it, Edwin's whole code is about building a non-living but simultaneously living thing. And the code is a cry for help, telling someone how to stop the Mimic. It's very interesting that Gregory seems to be that person that is supposed to stop it. So this code doesn't really prove anymore that Gregory is a robot, but it does still make sense if he is. Think about it. Fazbear Entertainment loses two important members of their board of directors, so they'll need replacements, and in the FNaF AR emails we see someone named M. Afton, obviously Michael Afton, with @BigBearMails on their email, meaning that Michael is still alive and works for Fazbear Entertainment. That likely means that Michael was brought onto the board after Edwin and Burrows died, meaning he could have then found Edwin's code and used the instructions to program a robot to do what the code says: stop the Mimic, destroy the animatronics. As much as people hate to admit it, Gregory being a robot is very likely in my opinion. If we're honest, there's really nothing contradicting Gregory being a robot outside of people simply disliking it. Some people say that Gregory can't be a robot because he goes to school and has a family, but that's kind of just feigning ignorance. Charlotte in the books has a family and goes to school, all without knowing that she's a robot. Gregory having a family with great parents works completely fine if Gregory was built by Michael, who essentially is his father. GGY also shows Gregory 3 years before the events of Security Breach, which we know given that the Pizzaplex had been open for only a couple of years by that point of the story, and the Faz Life magazine tells us the Pizzaplex was open for 5 years by the time of Security Breach. However, in GGY, 3 years before Security Breach, Gregory is 12. Now, I'm no mathematician, but it doesn't take one to realize that Gregory would therefore be 15 by Security Breach, which is absolutely not the case. It seems like he could be 12 in Security Breach, but he's apparently 12 3 years prior. What this would mean is either that Gregory is a robot and doesn't age, or that Gregory is a robot and ages like Charlotte in the books by transitioning from one robot to the next. That means that when Gregory was 13, he transitioned into the next robot, the Glitchtrap virus transferred into the older Gregory, and the 12-year-old Gregory is scrapped, which is why he is homeless in Security Breach despite having a family in the CDs and GGY. This explanation essentially explains everything, including the wall code. Michael built Gregory using the instructions that he found from Edwin's code, which he put in his room. The Pizzaplex was likely built over his house, forcing him to move with his house still under the Pizzaplex and using it as a sort of base of operations. Edwin's code up on the wall, the CD is about his potential daughter, and the son he built based on that wall code being on the other wall in the room. The wall code and both characters within the CDs all tie back to the person who owns the room they're found within. Vanessa, Gregory, and the wall code are all in Michael Afton's room because they all tie back to Michael Afton. Gregory being a robot also best explains the glitchy eye thing, because while a lot of people like to say that Vanessa has an illusion disc, not only do illusion discs not turn eyes into camera static, which the glitch effect is the same one as on the cameras, but also Vanessa doesn't have an illusion disc, because the illusion discs make people blurry on cameras, yet Vanny looks perfectly normal. Plus, Charlie's memories in the books were created using a camera, so it's not far-fetched at all to say that her eyes are cameras too, which would also explain Gregory's eyes emitting camera static. And Glamrock Freddy also tells us that all the massive amounts of power that must be used in the massive Pizzaplex are all diverted to the recharge stations. Yet somehow Gregory is able to survive alone inside a recharge station without being shocked to death. If he weren't a robot, how the hell would he still be alive? I understand that Gregory being a robot is a controversial theory, but most evidence points towards it, and not much really goes against it, so until something proves otherwise, it's the theory that I'm sticking with. But the last thing that I want to bring up is the identity of Glamrock Freddy. I made a YouTube short about this a couple days ago, so I'll basically say the same thing I said here. Freddy in Space 2 actually foreshadowed the story of Security Breach. There was a Twitter post that was sent on my Discord server, which talked about things that I never knew about, and it's very interesting. In Freddy in Space 2, Lolzhax, the main villain, brainwashed Freddy's friends, while Freddy remained unfazed and had to run around trying to save a kid. This directly parallels the events of Security Breach. The Glamrock animatronics are possessed by Glitch Trap, while Freddy is fine and tries to help Gregory. But what's more is that Lolzhax was made to look after Freddy's son, and then he went rogue. Think about that for a second. Who else do we know that was made to look after someone's son and then went rogue? The Mimic, who the storyteller heavily implies is the Glitch Trap virus, which is what possessed the Glamrocks. Aside from the fact that this further confirms the Mimic and Glitch Trap are one and the same, this makes Freddy from Freddy in Space 2 a stand-in for Edwin, since the Mimic was for Edwin's son, and Lolzhax was for Freddy's son. But since Freddy in Space 2 parallels Glamrock Freddy since he's protecting a kid, doesn't that make Edwin Glamrock Freddy? In the comments on that YouTube short, someone mentioned that Freddy found himself when he went under the pizza place, which would supposedly refute the Edwin idea. However, if you really think about it, Freddy's spirit is completely taken over by the Glitch Trap virus at all times, so even while Edwin inhabits the Freddy animatronic, his spirit might not actually be awakened until he sees what the Mimic becomes, which is when he goes under the pizza place, and that's how he found himself. His spirit was awakened when he found what his creation had become. All of this makes a lot of sense if you consider that Edwin made the Mimic to look after his son, but this failed and his son died. Now that the Mimic has gone rogue and is attacking Gregory, this random kid, Edwin deems it his responsibility to protect Gregory. It's a nice sense of closure for Edwin, and it explains what happens to his spirit after the events of the storyteller. And I think that it's a really cool story element. Obviously, this means that I was probably wrong in my timeline and my Glamrock Freddy dedicated video about Glamrock Freddy being the bite victim, but Freddy being Edwin works just as well. But that's everything that I wanted to talk about for this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to. I'm just now getting back into regular uploads following a little break I took to focus on school. I started like a week ago, I restarted uploading again like a week ago, and I'm continuing, and I will be continuing throughout the summer and probably beyond as long as I don't get sick again or something. So thanks for sticking around through the break, and I hope you haven't given up on me just yet. But with all that out of the way, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys!